Welcome back to everyone in Tone Town. We're glad to have you here at the Chairman of the Boards podcast for another episode. And just wanted to do a quick housekeeping to remind everybody, if you're listening, that we have a great Facebook group called Chairman of the Boards, where you can join free of charge. And it is a community of pedalboard building enthusiasts that is hosted by Brian, Grant, and I. We interact in the comments. We answer questions. People post pictures of their rigs. And there are a lot of people that have been living by the ideologies that we've been speaking about for the last 150 something episodes that are also there to help and can offer you advice that I think in a lot of cases is actually like good, solid advice. Like they've really listened to the stuff we've talked about and they're doing that in their own pedal boards. So I invite you to join us there if you're interested in that sort of content. I also welcome you to write us a review because it's always important for us to get reviews so that we know how we're doing, but also other people who might be interested in this can also find us too. So we appreciate that wherever you listen to podcasts. Grant, today we are going to be talking about sort of an extension of a few things that we've already been in conversation around, which is kind of centered around two things. Tariffs is one thing, and sort of new developments as that is kind of unfolding as we approach at the time of the recording of this podcast, the date of the renegotiations of the tariffs, at least here in the United States. And also, there's been a lot of notable closures of major companies that are retailers of musical equipment, especially in Europe. And we're talking about PMT, GAC, and then in America, Sam Ash. And these have been fairly notable closures because they've been legacy dealerships that have been around for decades and have been very instrumental in sort of shaping the landscape of guitar pedal retail, which is something that both of us are involved in. And Lee Anderton did an interview about sort of his take on why we're seeing these sorts of closures and why there's been this erosion of brick and mortar stores. And so we'll kind of get into some of those things. I'm also interested just to hear your feedback, your perspective as a listener in the comments, if there are things here that you find notable or maybe stones that haven't been turned over in this conversation as to possible reasons why this is happening. But before we get there, Grant, how are you today? Any initial thoughts on these topics before we dive in?
No, I'm doing good, man. Up here in Canada, it's we're finally at summer, and when you live in Canada, you're always looking forward to summer. So very happy to be here. Yeah, I think the topics we're covering today could come across as a little bit of potentially a downer, like a bit of a downer episode. But obviously, we're going to try and look at the positives here and what we can take away, what we can do about this as consumers, as retailers, and what we hope, this means kind of moving forward and how we can be proactive. And it's obviously, especially for manufacturers and eventually onto people purchasing, it's a very relevant topic. And I think it's just something that needs to be covered, and it's covered by many people, but we wanted to give our take on it and, chat this through, which I think will be good. It'll make for a good episode.
I think you're right that it does get covered. I think that the challenge is, or when I see other people covering these sorts of topics, is that often they're not involved in the industry in a manufacturing capacity. So they exist potentially as YouTubers, as sort of analysts, but they don't really have boots on the ground or money at stake or consumers at stake. And so I feel like the two of us especially are in a unique position to not only comment on the impact of that as we see it from people that are actually selling. And I think that some of these stores we sold product to, or at least I know we sold product to. Sam Ash was one of our dealers for many years. Andertons remains one of our dealers. And I think some of our distributors did sell to PMT and GAC. So, we had some interface or some overlap with those companies. to get into kind of Lee's article or some of the details of it, and we'll have it, of course, posted on screen, and we'll have it in the description for people that want to read that in full. But the basic gist of it was that the pandemic accelerated closures of these companies so that they were maybe already on a trajectory where this would happen, but the movement to online retail as sort of the standard during the pandemic sort of reset the style of customer that most brick and mortars were used to seeing, where the brick and mortar sort of became irrelevant. And the other thing that overlapped with that, in his opinion, was that there was no longer a specialization within the dealerships where certain dealerships would only carry certain brands. Instead, every dealer would carry every brand. And before we started talking, recording, I should say, on the podcast, Grant and I were remarking about sort of the slow change of that. And we would see things in the past like that dealers would actually be the content creators for a lot of the demonstrations of products that they would sell because they only sold certain brands. So I can remember companies like Fat Sound being arbiters of those sorts of things. They hired this guy, Greg V, one of the early guitar YouTubers that's not really around in that capacity anymore, but he would be doing demonstrations for other companies to help promote the brands that they carried. And even Pro Guitar Shop, which for some of you who are maybe younger audience members of the podcast may not remember this, but they were kind of like the biggest content creation dealership of products that they carried. I think at some point they kind of moved to being more pervasive and kind of being more of the model, early to the model that we see now where they carry everything under the sun. And I think you also saw other companies that kind of started to do that as well. Primax, I think, was one of them. Well, there's another one called Mad Ape. This might ring a bell to some of you who have been around for a while, where you started to see dealers move from more specialized. They carried certain brands and they really invested in those brands and created content for those brands because they didn't sell everything, to kind of moving to competing with companies that sold everything. In Lee's estimation from Andertons, he's saying that the amount of capital that is required to be able to cover the field and carry everything, it's just so much of an expense that there was no way that they could compete or have the cash on hand to be able to continue to stock all those and carry everything. And I do think that there is some merit to reverting back to specialization, because you get, first of all, when you go to Reverb or you go to look for a pedal and you see that it's available through 50 different retailers, isn't it just bad for all of them? Because how do they differentiate if all of them are price restricted, right? We have this thing in our industry called MAP, minimum advertised price. And we, in the United States at least, this is different in Europe, which may also have contributed to some of the issues that we're seeing there in a lot of these European-based companies, is that all of the companies need to maintain the same minimum advertised price in the United States. And if they deviate from that, then there can be penalties or they risk losing their dealership of your products. If you're competing against companies that are all selling for the same price, how do they distinguish themselves? They're using your stock photography mostly, and they're using your descriptions, they're using your videos. How can they stand out? You just see basically 50 duplicate advertisements of the same product on Reverb or eBay or wherever you're buying the product, especially on those sort of secondhand sites or those third-party sites, I should say. How does a customer even make the distinction of who to buy from? They're just seeing the same photo to show up 50 times. And they're like, I guess I buy this one. I don't really know how they do that, but just to pause there, Grant, anything that you think is notable in sort of that initial part of the conversation there?
Well, I think the going from how it kind of used to be, where you would be a bit more loyal to fewer brands. I know that early on with Goodwood, when I was growing up in the music industry and very fresh to it, then we started Goodwood and slowly started getting dealers. It was expected that they would make content, that they would make something unique. And the thing that goes with that, especially with our products and some of your products as well, Mason, is that what goes with that is to make a video, you have to learn the product. So when someone asks you a question, someone comes to that music store and says, "Hey, does this have an isolated output to get rid of ground loops?" Which both of our products have. Nowadays, the answer is like, "Well, I don't really know what I'm selling here. Like, it's one of many products, and I haven't really gotten to learn it." Back in the day, if they would have had made content and videos and all this, they would know the product, maybe not intimately, but enough to get the gist of when someone wants a junction box, they know the top 4 or 5 features on it. And so I think my biggest problem, and we've chatted about this offline a little bit, one of my biggest problem nowadays when it's a quantity game is a lot of the dealers struggle to learn the product to the point where they can actually sell it. If someone doesn't add to cart and buy and they are simply fulfilling, then it becomes a bit of it's just not that helpful. The customers come back to me and ask the questions, and then they go buy it from the music store. And so I think it made more sense strictly from a seller's point of view. It made more sense with the older model where the products were known, what was on the shelf was understood. How does this integrate into a pedal board, at least at the basics? And I think that was kind of a more helpful way for everybody. The customers got quicker answers. They could build up loyalties with certain stores because they knew what they were kind of going in for, all that. So I think another thing that's kind of parallel to this as well with the gigantic stores, which can invest, $10 million in stock before they've sold anything versus a brick and mortar, which would be, maybe tens of thousands. I don't know. Maybe that's too low that they can invest in stock. Like the numbers are vastly different. And Lee also touches on here some of the margins that they have to work with. And I think he talks about something in the realm of like a Squire starter pack. It sells for a few $100. And he talks about his margin on that, which is about $50. So if a gigantic store is selling tons of these things, hundreds of these, they can make these margins work because they move through them very quickly. But when you have a small store and maybe that starter pack sits on the wall for a month, then you're investing, let's say, $250 to sell a $300 starter pack to get $50. And then from there, you're paying rent, you're paying all of your expenses, payroll, all this stuff. And it's just really hard to make this work. And so for these smaller stores, you need to have, well, for any store really, your retail needs to move, or your stock needs to move and clear and cycle through rather quickly. And so if you can specialize, maybe you have a store, like I know the Guitar Sanctuary, they are very loyal to Mesa Boogie and Mesa Boogie amplifiers. So I know if I want a Mesa Boogie, among other things, I'll go to the Guitar Sanctuary, and they know what they're talking about. They know the product. They know what model numbers are going to be great for what I need. And so I think that's where this specialization, it gives a bit of credence to this idea of specialization and giving me a place, which the online space won't, giving me a place to go and physically interact with this product I'm considering investing in. And I think that's obviously one of the big pros to brick and mortar, other than as well talking to real human beings face to face. I'm a big fan of. But I think, yeah, I know there's a little bit there, but the specialization I think is something that I can absolutely get behind for many, many reasons.
Um, I think that one of the things that he talks about in terms of, I don't know if it's mentioned in here, if I'm conflating this with another video that I saw. I think actually KDH, who we've had on the channel before, had talked about this, where there in Europe, there isn't any map, or it's illegal to attempt to even enforce a minimum advertised price.
Hmm.
And as a consequence of that, it sort of becomes the Wild West in their pricing structure in Europe. And so you can see companies that can undermine each other with pricing to try to attempt to erode the price to get new customers in the door. But the consequence of that is that if there are only these $50 margins, that it's very difficult to compete. If somebody is willing to take less money and they're willing to advertise it for less and cut into their own margin to get a sale, it makes it very difficult. I think the other thing that ends up happening too is when companies go bankrupt, or they go, they liquidate a company like this. Sometimes that also can affect the marketplace, because now they are just selling stuff off as quickly as they can. It drops out the bottom out of the price, and now everybody sort of has to reset or sort of hold inventory until sort of the shockwave of that pricing decrease sort of dissipates and it's sort of fully flushed through the market. And I know that this is not an uncommon thing that happens in the European market specifically. And I don't know if that's what PMT and GAC did, or whether they sold to other dealerships that were in the area, that maybe they liquidated the stock to them so that they could resell it. I'm not sure. But it's a fairly consequential thing, and it is kind of crazy to see, especially like in America, like the legacy company like Sam Ash, to see them go under for a long time. But I would say, and I don't recall if Lee talked about this, but they definitely, Sam Ash operated very different than most other guitar companies. They were very old school. Like, for example, you had to mail them paper invoices, and they would mail you back paper
No
checks.
way.
Yeah, so they were very old school in that they still operated as though this was the 90s, or
Yep.
early 90s. They used email for communication and ordering and stuff like that, but all the payment stuff was all done like manually. Like, you mailed them snail mail an invoice, and they would mail you back a check, a paper check that you'd have to go in and cash.
Crazy.
And so it was kind of like old school, like that. And so I wonder, when I heard that they were closing, if there were some elements of sort of refusing to modernize that made it difficult for them to compete in the world. And they had so many stores. I think when we were in Sam Ash, I think we were in like 30 Sam Ash stores, across the country. Um, and it's wild that they're not here. Like they were, when I was a kid and you'd go to Guitar Center in Hollywood, they were, the other big store that was across the street. There used to be this really cool strip on Sunset that had all these great guitar shops. We had Mesa Boogie Hollywood, which is like Mesa Boogie's not only Mesa Boogie dealership, but they carried like pedals and guitars and stuff like that that were not just Mesa Boogie. And there's sort of these like little boutique guitar shops that had cool old pedals, and you could buy, at the time I thought it was outrageous, but you could buy like a way huge like Aquapus for like $300 or something like that. Now they're in thousands, but you could buy old Fulltone stuff. Anyway, it was really cool to see that, and it's a real bummer that they're gone. But yeah, it definitely seems that that companies that didn't adapt, and I would say Andertons would probably have been in this boat if Lee didn't have the foresight to understand the digital marketing and the YouTube realm, because they're just so huge. Like they just have so much content, and even with that, right? One of the PMT had a pretty big YouTube channel as well, not on the level of Andertons, but Andertons really, I think, you could see the direction that things were going. And Lee is sort of a staple, not only as sort of like a content creator figure, but as a dealer in all of Europe, and so they have a very recognizable brand on that metric. And I think that that was a really smart business move of his to kind of, not only have a company that sells a lot of great products, but also sort of be a spokesperson for the products that are sold there. And I think that they do about as good a job as anybody in terms of representing the brands that they carry, talking about them in videos, and trying to create some relevancy for the guitar store separately from them as sort of personalities on YouTube. So really interesting stuff there. I want to continue the conversation. We have a few other things to chat about, but before we do, I want to turn it over to Grant to talk about a few of the sponsors that make this podcast possible every single week.
Yes, and first, one of our favorite brick and mortar stores, the Guitar Sanctuary. This is a place you can go in person. They are not just, they don't just have a digital footprint, but you can make a real footprint in front of their store in McKinney, Texas, if you want to go and check them out. They do, as I mentioned earlier, they do specialize in Mesa Boogie. They have a whole range of guitars, amps, pedals, cable straps, accessories. If it's for guitar, you need to go to the Guitar Sanctuary. I will say they are very aptly named. It is a great place if you are in need for anything guitar related. Check them out at guitarsanctuary.com, or you can call them, you can text them, ask questions, and as I mentioned, visit them in McKinney, Texas. I also want to let you guys know about Neural DSP. Neural has a great blend of incredible hardware, the Quad Cortex and the Nano Cortex. And they also do a whole suite, if you will, of plugins, software that you can put straight into your DAW. You can actually load a whole bunch of these plugins onto your Quad Cortex. You can profile, I know a bunch of my customers do this as well. You can profile your actual real tube amps and overdrive pedals and then load them and save them into your Quad or Nano Cortex. There's so much you can do here if you are into gigging and you don't want to lug around all of your analog gear. A lot of it can actually live within the Quad and Nano Cortex. So if you want to save money on plugins, use the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, to save 30%. That's 70% away from free, 30% off of any of the plugins at neuraldsp.com. They are exquisite and definitely worth checking out at neuraldsp.com. Lastly, I want to tell you about BTPA, or Bestronix, as they're also known. Brad, our good friend at BTPA, is going to help you finish building your pedal board. Whether you need bulk cable, connectors, looms, he's also very good at building Quad Cortex racks and redundancy rigs if you're into touring. Whatever it is with finishing off your pedal board and the gear you need to do it, Brad is a Rolodex of part numbers and solutions to help you get there. So check them out at btpa.com. Use the code, wait for it, DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10% off at btpa.com. Ask for Brad and tell him the Chairman sent you. I wanted to ask you one last question here, Mason, around this. And you may have some other ones up your sleeve that you wanted to talk about here, but in relation to brick and mortar stores, your opinion as being someone who is very good at having an online presence and creating content that is relevant to what people want to watch, do you think, let's go back to some of these smaller stores. So someone, let's say there's ABC Music Store, I'm just making up a name here. ABC Music Store, they specialize in Fender guitars and custom shop, and then a couple of boutique pedal brands and amps. So a smaller store, do they, if they want to survive and do decently well, do they need to have a YouTube channel, an Instagram channel that they are, frequently posting on and creating content? Or do you feel like it's possible to have a specialized store without a, let's say, purposeful online presence where you're, trying
I
to
think
grow
if you're
your
starting
customer base
now
that way?
with a new store, it is incredibly hard if you didn't do that. Because the ways that people would find stores now are different than they were 20 years ago. And so there isn't a yellow pages that people are looking through,
Yeah.
or searching for a guitar store online that they can go and visit in person. Most commerce is done remotely. And the way that you create interest is in creating connections with people that want to come and see you or see what your store is about because they've watched it on YouTube dozens or hundreds of times. Another good example of people that are doing this is Casino Guitars. We've also had them on the podcast. Baxter, who is the owner of the store and has a very front-facing YouTube channel where he is engaging in conversations about guitar-related topics and gear-related topics. And some of it involves products that they sell at their guitar store in North Carolina. And as a consumer of those sorts of products, I see him online and I look and I say, yeah, like if I were ever in North Carolina, I'd totally go to that store because look at all the cool things that they have. Look at the knowledge of the people that are working there. It gives you sort of an insight into the personality of the store. And so you get an opportunity to sort of connect with them from a distance, and then that creates an interest for you to then go in person. And I just don't know that word of mouth is enough anymore. That used to be the way, but now it's not the way. And or I should say it is not the only way, or maybe it's potentially a less effective way. And like I wonder sometimes what would be the fate of Normans if they didn't have this massive YouTube channel, or they didn't have, I don't know the person that kind of pushed go on or start on that button, but I'm presuming it might have been Mark Agnesi. Somebody there decided that they're going to start creating this content on YouTube. They're going to document people that come into the store, and it creates this buzz about the store. And Norman's was always, even when I was a kid, was a place that people knew about as sort of a vintage guitar store. But I would suspect it would have been maybe viewed closer to a way like Gruhn's or something like that as in Nashville, where, of course, the people in Nashville know it and guitar collectors know it. But I wouldn't say that it has the same, like, there's not a Netflix movie made about Gruhn's, but there is about Normans. But you could argue that Gruhn's is maybe even more comprehensive in some ways than Norman in terms of, they certainly, I think, at least equal him in terms of their understanding of vintage instruments and being able to authenticate things. I think they have this whole other repair department that they do that's sort of well beyond, I think, what Norman's does. And they're a very special shop and have a lot of really specialized knowledge. But if you were to present these to sort of like average guitar content consumers, I bet a lot of them don't even know what Gruhn's is, even though it's certainly on that level of Normans in terms of the types of instruments that they sell, and all the knowledge that's within that establishment. I think that they're right. A lot of places are sort of just doing it the way they've always done it. I don't think that that's an option for new brands anymore and new dealerships. I think they have to play this game because that's the way that people find you.
I think on the points on relationship as well, or connections with people, I think you said, that is where the YouTube, Instagram, the consistency, having a face to the small business, it allows people who have never met you to start to feel like they know you, and they will get to know your personality and what you're all about, what you value, and if it aligns or resonates with them, then like Norman's, for myself, it's like Norman's is a destination. I feel like I've seen it so many times online. I've seen Norm talk about all these different guitars, have all these different people in there, Bonamassa coming through and buying 2 or 3 guitars every time he's in. And it's like, man, that would be so cool to be in those 4 walls, and to see, and I've never been, but I feel like I already kind of know what the store feels like. And so to tie that in with reality and be there in person, and the YouTube channel has allowed for that. But man, the other flip side of this is uh, and I don't know Norm, I don't know much about the store at all, so I'm guessing here, but I would assume that Norm did not start the store thinking that he would be a content creator. And like this pivot nowadays, and I have to be transparent. Especially early days of Goodwood, I hated content. Absolutely. And I know that I am not alone in this. It's one of the most popular things you hear people say. I can't stand posting on Instagram or having to be on YouTube all day, figuring out this content stuff. But now I really do enjoy it now that I've done it for however many years. And it is a way to communicate and see what people are actually interested in. Like, oh, I didn't think people would care about this topic, but here we are. You get to get some really cool insight and have some cool conversations while learning how to get a tough skin, ignoring all the trolls, of which there are an endless supply. And I think it can be a really great community. And there are a lot of people I've met online, and then a few of those people I've been able to meet in person, and it feels like I already know them. The relationship has already been established. You being one of them. I've met you online, and then I've met you in person once, and what a time that was. And I think that it's a really cool place to be, and you can grow your network well beyond what you ever could have imagined, 20 years ago. And so it's probably a double-sided coin of there's a lot of pros to this kind of world we live in now with social media and connection and all this, and a whole bunch of downsides that come with it as well. But yeah, I was just curious what you would think about that if a new store would have to have an
Yeah.
online presence almost before the physical
I
store
think
was
it's
set
I think
up
it's
to a
absolutely
degree.
essential, but
It's kind
I
of
do
essential
think that
these
the
days, eh?
specialization thing needs to come back, because I think that that's the only way that small stores can compete, where it's like they become known as like they're the Vertex guys or whatever, and that creates, because I think that right now it is too, most pedals are too available everywhere. And I don't even know that it really helps the brand that much. Like, I don't know that it helps you to be available in 50 places as opposed to 25 in one state, because most people are not going in person. There are maybe some strategic shops where they do get a lot of foot traffic. Chicago Music Exchange, I think, is a good example of that. They get tons of foot traffic. There are a lot of people that go in there to try stuff. Great. That would be a place, a brick and mortar store, that you should probably have your products if you can get in. Sweetwater, probably a good place to have your products if you can get in. But there are a lot of places where there's all the dealership can do. And I think that this is something that I noticed at NAMM too. Most dealers are just looking for companies that they can piggyback on the content that they're already creating and use that to market to their customers. So they're just repurposing what
Yeah.
you're already doing. They're using the photos that you provide, the descriptions and manuals that you provide. They're using all of your content, and they're just adding another place to buy it. And I think that there is a point with which that doesn't help you anymore as a brand, and it doesn't really help them. And it's really interesting to see the consequence to brands that won't do that. Like, I couldn't have imagined 15 years ago that Fulltone would really not be part of the conversation of like big pedal companies right now. Like, they were so ahead of everybody in the 90s and in the early 2000s. And now it's not to say that anything changed about the quality of their pedals. I still think, presumably with Jackson Audio, they're still fine pedals and made the way that they were made, certainly under the watchful eye of Mike Fuller. But they're not really in the conversation for products when you talk about, I don't know, overdrives or wahs or univibes or fill in the blank buzzes. But they should be. But the reason that they're not is because they didn't want to play that game. They didn't want to play the content game. And I don't know if it's because they thought it would be a fad or that they were just going to stay the course and they had developed their customer base and that was satisfactory. But they're really not that relevant to the next wave of guitar pedal buyers. And I think that that's a huge problem. I think it's a huge problem from a marketing perspective that they don't have a brand identity in the digital space in the same way that their competitors did. And maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe that doesn't matter to them, and maybe the existing customers are enough, but if I'm doing marketing for Fulltone right now, we're basically in some ways starting as though we're a new company in that regard, because there really hasn't been much about them. The most interesting piece of content that I've seen about Fulltone is like a short video documentary that Jackson did talking about the transition of them becoming partnered with Mike Fuller in remaking these products. That's nothing. Yeah.
It was kind of silence after that, right? And I think that's the other interesting opportunity here as well for specializing and for, again, the world we live in is you have this ability to communicate and for certain messages to, whether you want them to or not, to really reach quite a wide audience. And oftentimes the message that you really want to go out there can go nowhere. But in the instance of Fulltone and the controversy around that brand, he may not have an online presence, but some of the things he may have stood for or stands for just spread like wildfire through the whole music industry. And so not to focus on that exact point, but the idea being that you now have an interesting way of communicating what you value as a company, as the individual that owns the company. And again, if that resonates with your audience, then your message will spread a little bit further. It's almost the new word of mouth, is being able to create content on what you value as a person, as a company. And I think that's where I would think for a company the size of Fulltone, which isn't the size of Boss, but it's much bigger than the majority of companies, I would assume they would have a full-time content creator that is, getting the word out. And that can be one of the easiest ways. It's not easy, but one of the easiest ways out of the list to grow your brand and get the word out and, keep things moving forward. And so, yeah, it is very interesting for you to bring up that specific example. I wouldn't have thought of that, of them not really having much of an online presence, still kind of going off the back of the name that they built 20 years ago, but it's dwindling, it would seem. And it doesn't have the same effect. And even on board builds, I mean, I see an OCD every once in a while. Even rarer than that, I'll see maybe a vibe or something come through. But man, it's rare. It is, and for the quality of what the OCD is, like it's a great overdrive pedal. But I don't think it has anything to do with as you said, nothing to do with the quality of the product. It's a great product. They make really good pedals. They're not out there, and the stuff that is out there is unflattering, and so they have nothing to counteract that message with demonstrating what the qualities are of their products and why people should consider them. I think on the flip side, somebody who I would say was in a similar boat to him, like Analogman, in terms of their marketing, one thing that they've done, of course, they've structured themselves where they have sort of like scarcity in certain products. And I think the King of Tone has kind of helped keep the name relevant. But I think his collaborations with MXR and Dunlop and now with Chase Bliss have continued to keep relevancy there in different audiences, in newer and younger audiences, especially with Chase Bliss. And being able to tell the story of him and his pedals and the specialty that they have. And I think that's been incredibly smart. Like if you're somebody like Mike Fuller, who may share some sort of ideology to, let's say, Analog Mike, where he's not really a public facing guy, he's not doing content creation, he's not out there in front, making content the same way that, let's say, Josh at JHS does or something.
to partner with companies that do that or have continued to stay relevant and or are new and more cutting edge, that's a really smart move, is to sort of say, okay, we're going to partner with these companies. They're doing new and exciting things, and they're going to sort of elevate our brand and broadcast that to new people. I think that Fulltone, if they didn't want to do the front facing thing, they could consider other avenues like this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation in that regard, how
Yeah.
things are kind of how they've shifted and so quickly as well. Like it just seems like it's shifted to where we're at now in the blink of an eye. And again, I think with the music stores and with these brands and social media and COVID, with the necessity to be online, accelerated it so fast. And obviously there were lots of online everything, but when COVID came around, it's like if you don't have a way to easily check out online or easily get in touch online or learn more or this, if you couldn't quickly pivot, it was you took a pretty serious hit, even more so than brands would have anyways. And so, yeah, I think it's a relevant topic, challenging for me as well to hear, to keep reminding me to prioritize what's actually important, because keeping up with the content game is no
it
small
is.
task.
It is not insignificant.
It's a big ask.
I want to pivot, Grant, to another interesting article that Robert Keeley had actually posted, and he let's see where Robert Keeley had posted this article about needing to use or getting a surprise bill for tariffs and using $1.83 million
yes.
in Amex points to pay a surprise tariff bill. I think a lot of companies are running into this at the moment, and looks like it's making me now have to subscribe to their content in order to view it, but I'll keep it on screen nonetheless. But I was able to read through it briefly before it prompted me with having to subscribe to Bloomberg. But in essence, ordered parts. They just had a recent release with the Manus, which is their Claude style overdrive, where it's in sort of a folded metal enclosure. It's got some toggle switches to add in some different features, and again, is their sort of approach to the Klon, and almost marketed as the Klon for people that don't like Klons. And I'm sure that they bought all the parts, they built it, and then they get this tariff bill, and I think that the $1.83 million or 1.83 million Amex points is something in the tens of thousands range. I think it's in the 10,000, 11,000 range. In actual dollars, it sounds like a lot more dire when you hear it in the context of 1.83 million.
Yeah.
But I think that this is a thing that's happening to tons of companies that you were on some sort of recurring order, that wouldn't be that uncommon, where you would know sort of your rough consumables of foot switches and jacks, and you might have some sort of standing order with manufacturers overseas to say, okay, every quarter you're going to release 20,000 jacks and 5,000 foot switches or whatever it is. And you're on that cadence, the tariff goes into effect, and then these things are already on their way. There's no stopping them. You're getting them, and whenever the day is that they land here, that's the tariff price that you pay. And there really isn't any way for small companies that are sort of sub 100 people to be able to have, let's say, the cash reserves or the lobbying power to go and say, hey, this is really having an adverse effect on our business. Are we given an allowance the same way that Tesla and Apple are given these sorts of allowances to bring stuff in without tariffs? Because it is hugely consequential. Even in our manufacturing, we're having this conversation right now about, at this moment in time, again, this is before July 9th, where supposedly there's supposed to be some reckoning of the tariffs or whatever's coming down the pipeline. That I think every pedal is costing at least $8 or $9 more per pedal. We've talked about in previous episodes where it's not just the cost. So
a cost,
not retail. Cost is $8 or $9 more just to
not
make
retail.
It. The typical calculus is whatever that cost is multiplied by 4 is the retail price, because you have to build in, obviously, your efforts and energy in creating the product and trying to recoup some of that in the sale, payroll, taxes, insurance, all these other things. Plus you're cutting in dealers between 30 and 50% for that, in terms of how much they get a discount off of the street price or the minimum advertised price. So adding $8 at retail is like adding another, there's a $32. Is that right? $36. Sorry, okay, $32.
36.
Or are you
32,
calculating
sorry.
in Canadian?
I'm thinking of
yeah. You had to translate it.
I must have
been. So anyway, yeah, so $32 more. So if a pedal is, let's say, $200 or $199, now it's $132 or $232, and that's substantial. That's 15% increase at least, from what it was before. So
yeah.
And I know that none of us, and I think I'm speaking for everyone when I say none of us want to increase prices. I think we would rather try to keep things locked in and as consistent as possible. There's already plenty of economic uncertainty in a lot of families, and we don't expect you to buy pedals over buying groceries for your families. And we understand that. So the question is, what do we do? Do you wait? Do you see what happens? These are all sort of the existential questions that we were asking ourselves. And you can see that, with, Robert Keeley having to, cash in these points, because he doesn't have, most pedal companies don't have a $10,000+ cash reserve to just, absorb a unexpected expense like that. And especially for the people that were already having things coming in, the tariffs going to affect, most of this stuff is not brought over by air. So it's not like they order it and they get it in a couple of days. It's usually brought over by boat. It takes a month at least to get here.
45 days,
and in that time, the landscape could be totally different, except they're still on the hook for whatever comes in. So I think it's kind of it's crazy to see what's happening with folks like Keeley and how I mean this is definitely not just him. This has got to be a lot of people that are just like, or some of people I've heard are just not even claiming stuff. Like it comes into port and they're like, I can't pick it up because I can't pay. We didn't budget to spend an extra 20%.
Yeah. And 20% is, that would be great in a lot of cases. Like what has happened with some other companies. I think we mentioned this on the last episode, but other companies, they bought $100,000 worth of stock, and then now it's ready to ship from overseas to the ports, but the tariffs are at 150%. So now this $100,000 order is going to cost them, what, $250,000 all up? But that was $150,000 that comes straight out of their profit. So now they have to wait, and it has to sit in China until something changes with tariffs. And if nothing changes with tariffs, well, then you start getting fees on holding stock. And if something lands at the port and you don't claim it, I assume you might know more about this than I do. You start paying holding fees there. And there's all of there's no win here that makes a whole lot of sense or makes this easy. And so the flip side is, well, don't order stock. Well, how do I keep my payroll? And I have salaries to pay, I have all this. and things might get worse if I wait, let's say July 9th. Things might get worse at July 9th, or they might get better. So now I have to wait and then make a decision, but waiting might be the wrong move at this point. You just don't know. There's no way of knowing. And that's where it, especially as a small business, like you're saying, where cash is always tight. It feels,
I think it is
it feels very, very difficult. It's very tricky. And also, again, I'd say being a small business, and I don't have a track record with knowing how to deal with fluctuating tariffs. Like I'm new. And so you're basically we're all kind of just talking amongst ourselves. Like, what do you guys think? Have you heard anything? I was texting Mario from Access Electronics, also in Canada. I was asking him, I was like, have you heard anything on this? And luckily he shared some great insight with me. We're all a little bit nervous, a little worried, but also love what we do and want to figure out a way forward to keep this stuff moving forward and keep doing what we love and what puts food on the table, what pays the mortgage, all this. It's an interesting time. And so I think that's where, I don't know, how you're approaching this, Mason, but that's where I'm trying to look for the opportunity. Like, what can we do? What's the smart move here, even if it means doing, shifting a little bit or doing a bit of a pivot? What is the equivalent of Andertons back in the day? Like, I think YouTube is going to be a smart thing to invest in. Like, what is that right now? What is the next YouTube for where we currently are with the uncertainty, with economic uncertainty with everything that's going on? And so I'm trying to, and I know a lot of other business owners trying to stay positive, trying to look for the opportunity, trying to make a smart move that isn't rash. And I'm very grateful for loyal customers that are sticking with us throughout all of this craziness and delays
people are fairly
and all that's going on at the moment.
Of the consequences here. And certainly we're not asking, for you to go out and buy stuff now to try to offset this. These are sort of issues that I think are sort of well beyond anybody's control. I think it's just kind of like more of just like a check-in, so that if you're somebody who's curious about the stuff or is curious about the kind of what's going on behind the scenes, that you have some insight as to what that is. I don't know that there's anything to do, like as a customer, certainly, of course, all of us welcome, your support in terms of buying our products and stuff like that. The challenge is that I think most of us are running out of product, to sell, that we still had existing inventory to make.
Yep.
The other thing I'm concerned about on the flip side of this is, let's say on July 9th, that either the current tariffs become locked in and that becomes sort of the new normal, or they get backed off, and go back to the original rate. There's going to be a bottleneck of every single manufacturer ordering and shipping at the same time, not just in our industry, but across industries. And I wonder if you're going to see sort of the COVID bottleneck in ports, where you have everybody's stuff arriving at once, and you have these much longer delays as a consequence, because companies now are all trying to get their stuff at the same time because the floodgates are open back up. And that can sort of create a manufacturing backlog that, can be tough to be able to get your stuff quickly and get it made quickly. And you're competing with all these other folks that are kind of trying to do the same thing. Of course, I think that would be a welcome change from just the idea of having to pay 150% more for the same product. But nevertheless, there may be some sort of adjusting and growing pains that occur kind of as this sort of gets sorted out.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's a fair point of definitely not asking anyone to do anything on the purchasing side outside of what they would normally do anyways. And it's more just, I think, the understanding of, we're all just trying to make this up as we go and trying to make the best decision with what we have, and understanding customers on like, yep, totally understand that this was unforeseen, or that there may be more delays or whatever on, some of these products is always very helpful. And it's an interesting time to be a retailer of probably just about anything right now, not even just in the music industry. It's a tricky
Yeah.
time in that regard, but
Yeah.
we'll all figure it
Well,
out. We'll all get there
it's
together
been great to speak
one
with
way or
you,
another.
Grant, as always. And as I say to all of you out there, we appreciate you being here, listening, being part of the conversation. Um, the music industry is changing. I think the landscape is changing. People's interests are changing, and it's going to be interesting to see how things continue to evolve over the next year or two as the tariffs kind of sort themselves out, and we see the type of products that are coming out. That there may be some sort of thinning of the herd potentially of pedal companies. I guess potentially a name, right? It's like in the online ecosystem, you can sort of look whatever way you want to look. You can look as though everything is the same and there's not really much to differentiate the way that your Instagram page looks or your website looks, that doesn't necessarily indicate the health or wellness of the brand. You can keep it looking the same, and it's from the outside perspective is the same. But I would say there have been a lot of new players in the pedal ecosystem that have come in in the last 10 years. I think certainly more than had occurred in the previous 20 have come in the last 10 or maybe even the last 5. And I wonder how much this sort of stuff will sort of regulate some of that. And not that I think it's a problem. I think it's good to have competition. I think it's good to have new companies that come in. Certainly some of them sort of break through and become part of the lexicon of pedal brands that we all know and recognize. But I think it'll just be interesting to kind of see how it shapes things and what kind of products we see kind of come out of this, and whether you see some cool innovation. I think what Josh Scott is doing is kind of a cool workaround. I don't know that he intended it as that, but like the drops, where you have sort of like a limited number of products, they all sort of released in these batches, and it's all stuff that he sells direct. That's kind of a way to combat some of this stuff, because you don't have to worry about the same issues with margin. Things can cost a little bit more. Customers can tolerate a little bit of a higher price on this stuff, because it's still much less than what it would be at retail. And you get to engage directly with your customers, and you can absorb some of these costs more easily. If you're not dealing with dealers, an $8 differential, although significant, it's not like you have to now mark that up 4x. You can, absorbing an $8 cost difference is much different than a $32 cost difference to the consumer. So I wonder if we're going to see more of that sort of stuff. Maybe it's not DIY kits, but maybe it's like certain products to come out direct to consumer in smaller quantities, because that's more doable, and the profit margins end up being the same in the end, So I don't know. It will be.
Be interesting to see. Yeah, very interesting to see.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Well, good chatting to you, Mason. And thanks everyone for watching or listening.
We'll see you in the next one. Again, check out Facebook, write us a review, and we'll see you all next week, hopefully with Brian here. As we're all sort of like making our rounds with summer vacations. We're trying our best, but we'll sort of come in and out as we can, and try to hold down the fort in each other's absence.